It had only been 4 months since John moved into the neighborhood. He had picked this place very carefully. After years of saving money, he wanted somewhere peaceful, somewhere that felt safe. The tree-lined streets, the neat lawns, and the small park at the corner had caught his attention the first time he drove through. The houses all looked well kept, with friendly porches and flower beds. It seemed like the perfect place to start. A quiet chapter in his life, especially since his wife, Emily, was away serving in the Navy. He thought this would be a good home for them both, a place to finally settle after moving from base to base. At first, everything felt normal. His nearest neighbors smiled politely when they saw him, although no one was overly friendly. He didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just reserved people. Spent his first weeks arranging furniture, fixing small things around the house, and planting a few flowers in the front yard. It felt good to finally have a place of his own, even if Emily wasn't there yet to see it. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, John came home from the grocery store, carrying a paper bag of food. As he walked toward the front door, he noticed a white envelope sticking halfway out of the mailbox. It looked official, with the name of the Homeowners Association printed neatly at the top. He assumed it might be some kind of welcome letter. He even smiled a little, thinking it was nice of them to send a greeting. Inside the house, he set the groceries on the kitchen counter, made himself a quick cup of coffee, and finally sat down to open the envelope. The first line made his eyebrows pull together. It wasn't a welcome note at all. It was a notice of violation. John read the letter twice, certain he must be misunderstanding something. According to the HOA, his property was out of compliance with neighborhood regulations. The list of issues seemed both strange and petty. First, they said his mailbox was not painted the approved shade of green. Second, they claimed his small flagpole in the front yard was unauthorized and had to be removed immediately. Third, they mentioned structural modifications to his porch that were never approved by the board. He stared at the paper for a long moment. The porch? He hadn't touched the porch. It was exactly the way it had been when he bought the house. The flagpole was already there when he moved in too, and he liked it. It wasn't hurting anyone. And the mailbox? That was just a mailbox. The letter continued in a cold, formal tone, warning him that he had exactly 14 days to fix the violations. If he didn't, the HOA would begin issuing fines, which could eventually lead to further legal action, including the possibility of foreclosure or eviction. His coffee didn't taste so good anymore. John set the letter down and rubbed his forehead. He tried to remember if the seller or the real estate agent had ever mentioned anything about strict HOA rules. There had been a thick stack of papers at the closing, but honestly, he hadn't read every single page. He'd been more focused on signing everything quickly so the sale could go through. Maybe the rules were in there somewhere. Still, this felt extreme. He decided to call the HOA office. The number was printed at the bottom of the letter, so he dialed it and waited. A woman's voice answered, brisk and businesslike. Homeowners Association office, she said. Double quotes, yes. Hi, John began, trying to keep his tone polite. I received a notice about my property being out of compliance, but I think there's been a mistake. Some of the things you listed were already there when I moved in. What's your address? She asked, not sounding particularly interested. Gave it to her, and there was a short pause as she typed. Yes, she said finally. We have 3 violations on file for your property. The mailbox color is incorrect, the flagpole is not approved, and the porch modification was never authorized. I didn't make any modification to the porch, John explained. It was like that when I bought the house, and the flagpole was already there too. The previous owner must have, regardless, she interrupted. It is your responsibility now. The rules are the rules. You have 14 days to correct these issues. Her tone was sharp, final. No offer to investigate. No sign of flexibility. John felt irritation rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. Couldn't we maybe schedule a time for someone to come take a look? I think there's been some misunderstanding. You can submit an appeal in writing, she said, her voice already slipping into that tone people use when they want to end a conversation. But the deadline for compliance remains in place. And then she hung up. John sat there for a few moments, staring at his phone. He wasn't used to being dismissed like that, especially when he was trying to be reasonable. A part of him wanted to just ignore the letter, but the phrase "further legal action" kept echoing in his head. That night, he looked through the old listing photos of the house online. Sure enough, the porch looked exactly the same then as it did now. The flagpole was visible in the pictures, too. He printed those out and placed them in a folder, thinking they might help his case. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The neighborhood had always looked so peaceful, but maybe there was something under the surface, something controlling, something watching. He remembered how the board members of an HOA could have surprising power over residents, even in their own homes. The next morning, when John went outside to bring in the trash bins, he noticed a man standing across the street. The man was holding a phone and appeared to be taking pictures of John's house. When John made eye contact, the man quickly looked away and walked down the sidewalk. It was a strange, unsettling moment. John had lived in different places before, but he had never felt like someone was quietly building a case against him. That's what this felt like, not neighborly concern, but a hunt for reasons to cause trouble. By the end of the week, the anxiety had settled into his stomach like a heavy stone. He had planned to spend these months peacefully waiting for Emily to come home, maybe repainting the living room or starting a small vegetable garden. Instead, he was researching HOA bylaws, looking at federal housing protections, and wondering how far these people could actually go. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. HOA wasn't going to back off easily, and the next few weeks would test his patience and eventually bring out a side of Emily that the board would never forget. The letter had unsettled John, but he tried to handle it calmly. He sent his written appeal to the HOA, attaching the old real estate listing photos that showed the porch and the flagpole exactly as they were when he moved in. He thought this would clear things up quickly. After all, facts were facts. He slipped the envelope into the outgoing mail, feeling a little lighter, convinced that someone on the board would see reason. But just 3 days later, another envelope appeared in his mailbox. He recognized the HOA logo instantly. His stomach tightened before he even opened it. This time, the letter was shorter but somehow more aggressive. It said that his failure to comply had been noted, and that the HOA was prepared to take further steps if he did not address the violations immediately. John frowned. How could they say he'd failed to comply when he'd only just sent his appeal? There was no mention of receiving it, no sign that anyone had even looked at his evidence. It was as if they hadn't read it at all. That afternoon, as he stepped outside to water his front flower bed, he saw the same man from last week, the one who had been taking pictures of his house. This time, the man wasn't trying to be subtle. He stood right at the edge of the lawn, snapping close-up shots of the porch railings, the flagpole, even the mailbox. "Can I help you with something?" John called out, his voice polite but firm. The man looked up with a smirk. "It's documenting violations," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "OA business." John's jaw tightened. "I've already filed an appeal. These things were here before I moved." The man shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Rules are rules. I'll need to fix it or pay the fines." And with that, he walked off down the sidewalk, still taking pictures as he went. The next day, John got a knock on his door. It was another HOA board member, a woman this time, holding a clipboard. She didn't smile, without even stepping inside. She announced that she was there for a property compliance review. John told her he was in the middle of lunch and asked if she could come back at a scheduled time. She ignored the request and began circling the house. Scribbling notes by the time she left, John felt like he was under surveillance. Every time he opened his curtains, he half expected to see someone outside with a camera or clipboard.
Ow.
Neighborhood that had seemed calm and quiet when he first arrived now felt tense, almost hostile. The notices didn't stop. In fact, they increased. Within 2 weeks, he received 3 more letters from the HOA. One complained about the unauthorized lawn ornament, a small wooden bench he had placed near the flower bed. Another claimed his trash bins had been visible from the street for too long after pickup, even though he'd brought them in the same afternoon. The third accused him of improper storage of gardening tools. Even though they were neatly hung on hooks in his side yard, John began to realize this. It wasn't about the porch or the mailbox anymore. This was targeted harassment. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were actively looking for reasons to pressure him. He mentioned it to a neighbor across the street, a middle-aged man named Carl, while they both happened to be outside one morning. Carl hesitated, glancing around like he was afraid someone might overhear. Then he lowered his voice and said, "You're not the first, you know. The president of the HOA, he's had it out for new residents before, especially military families. I've seen it happen." That surprised John. "Why military families?" Carl gave a small shrug. "I think she doesn't like that there. Away a lot, or maybe she feels like they don't fit in with her idea of the neighborhood. A couple years ago, she drove out a young Air Force couple over a bunch of petty fines. They couldn't take the stress anymore and sold their house." John felt a slow, simmering anger rising in his chest. Emily had devoted her life to serving the country, and now this HOA president was using her absence to push him around? That didn't sit right with him. But Carl's warning came with another piece of advice. Be careful. She's good at twisting things. If you get angry or confront her the wrong way, she'll use it against you. Document everything. And so, John started keeping a record. Every letter, every visit, every picture-taking incident went into a growing folder on his desk. He took photos of his property every few days to show that nothing was changing and nothing was out of order. Still, the harassment wore him down. He found himself dreading the sound of the mailbox lid or the doorbell. Nights were restless, filled with thoughts of fines piling up or legal threats turning real. One evening, after another long day of dealing with their nonsense, John sat on the porch steps and stared out at the street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the lawns. A couple walked their dog in silence. Across the street, a curtain moved slightly, and he thought he saw someone watching him. He couldn't tell if it was paranoia or reality anymore. He tried calling the HOA office again, this time asking directly for the president. When she finally picked up, her voice was syrupy sweet at first, almost mocking. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. How can I help you?" "I'd like to resolve these violations," he said evenly. "But I've already sent proof that 2 of them were existing conditions when I bought the house, and the others are. Honestly ridiculous. My bench? My trash bins? None of this is harming the community." The sugar in her tone dissolved instantly. "Mr. Anderson, the HOA has standards for a reason. If we let one person break the rules, soon everyone will think they can do whatever they want. That's how neighborhoods fall apart." John almost laughed at the absurdity. "So, a bench near my flowers is going to bring down the neighborhood." She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, "You have until the end of the month. After that, the fines start. Have a nice day." And just like that, the line went dead. John sat back in his chair, phone still in his hand, heart beating faster. It was becoming clear this wasn't going to be resolved through polite conversation. These people weren't interested in compromise or facts. They wanted obedience. That night, he typed a long email to Emily. He had avoided telling her too much about the situation before because he didn't want to add stress to her deployment. But now, it felt unavoidable. Explained everything. The letters, the photos, the surprise inspections, the constant feeling of being watched. He attached scanned copies of all the notices and even sent a few of his own photos for context. When he hit send, he felt both relief and guilt. Relief because he was no longer carrying this burden alone. Guilt because he knew Emily would be furious, and she already had enough on her plate serving overseas. A week later, Emily replied. Her message was short but clear. "We'll talk about this when I get home. Don't do anything until then." John could almost hear her voice in those words, calm, firm, and with an edge of authority. It gave him a small spark of hope. Emily didn't scare easily, and she knew how to deal with bullies, whether they wore uniforms or hid behind neighborhood regulations. But the HOA didn't slow down just because Emily was coming back soon. In fact, they seemed to sense that time was running out to push him into submission. 2 more urgent violation notices arrived that week, both citing minor, almost laughable issues a single weed near his driveway, and a non-standard wind chime on his back porch. John added them to the growing pile in his folder. His plan was simple now. Endure it, document it, and wait for Emily. Because deep down, he knew that when she finally stepped into that boardroom, everything was going to change. The email Emily had sent from overseas was short, but John knew it meant one thing. She was going to handle this personally. He had learned over the years that when Emily said, "Don't do anything until I get home," it wasn't just advice. It was a plan. Oh. She was the type of person who, once she got involved in something, didn't back down until it was resolved. Still, there were a few weeks left before her return, and the HOA seemed determined to make every day as stressful as possible. One Friday morning, just 10 days before Emily was due to arrive, John opened his mailbox to find yet another letter. From the HOA, this one wasn't just a violation notice. It was a mandatory meeting summons. The language was formal, almost threatening. It stated that the HOA board required his presence at the monthly compliance meeting to address ongoing and unresolved violations. Failure to attend, the letter warned, could result in escalated action, which John assumed meant heavier fines or even legal steps. The meeting was set for the day after Emily's return. John read the letter twice, then slowly sat down at the kitchen table. He could almost feel the smirk of the HOA president through the words on the page. They were probably expecting him to come alone, flustered and defensive. But the thought of walking into that meeting with Emily by his side, that gave him a flicker of satisfaction. The next week crawled by. John kept himself busy with small projects around the house, mostly to keep his mind off the growing tension. Every time he saw someone from the HOA, a board member, the man with the camera, or that clipboard lady, he imagined the moment Emily would meet them. He didn't tell them she was coming. Let it be a surprise. The day before Emily's flight, John cleaned the house, stocked the fridge, and tried to make everything feel welcoming. She'd been gone for months, serving overseas on a Navy mission, and he wanted her homecoming to feel warm and peaceful, even if a storm was waiting for them at that meeting. When she finally walked through the front door that evening, her travel-worn uniform, with her bag slung over her shoulder, John felt a wave of relief. He hugged her tightly, holding on just a moment longer than usual. For the first few minutes, they didn't talk about the HOA at all. They sat on the couch, drank coffee, and simply caught up. She asked about his work, the weather, the neighbors. He answered honestly. Though his mind was already picturing tomorrow's meeting, eventually Emily leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, "All right, show me everything." John brought out the folder. It was thick now, letters, printed emails, photos, even his notes about the times people had come to the house unannounced. Emily flipped through each page slowly, her expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt, didn't make a single comment, until she'd gone through it all. Finally, she set the stack down on the coffee table and looked at him. "They've been trying to intimidate you," she said flatly. "And they've been sloppy about it. They're counting on you not knowing the rules or the law. That's their first mistake." John almost smiled. "And the second mistake?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, a glint of determination in them, thinking, "I'm just going to sit here and let them get away with it." That night, Emily sat at the dining table with her laptop open, typing rapidly. John recognized that posture. The way she leaned forward slightly, her shoulders squared, her eyes sharp. It was the same focus she had when preparing for a mission briefing. Only this time, the mission was dismantling the HOA's case against them. She pulled up the HOA bylaws from the community website and read every page. She highlighted sections about property modifications, appeal processes, and residents' rights. Then she opened a separate tab to look up the Service Members Civil Relief Act, a federal law that offered certain protections to active-duty military personnel and their families. John had never thought about that in relation to the HOA, but Emily was already connecting the dots. "They've been violating at least 2 parts of this," she murmured, scrolling quickly. "And they're leaving a paper trail while they do it. This isn't just harassment, it's discrimination." John watched her work, feeling both impressed and a little sorry for the HOA board. They had no idea what was about to hit them. The morning of the meeting, Emily woke early. She took her time getting ready, polishing her shoes and pressing the creases of her navy dress uniform until they were razor sharp. No one had asked her to, but John knew exactly why she was. The uniform wasn't just clothing, it was a statement. It said, "I've served my country. I know the law, and I'm not afraid of you." John wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, letting Emily take the visual lead. As they walked to the community clubhouse where the meeting was held, he noticed heads turning. A couple of neighbors whispered to each other as they passed. Word traveled fast in this neighborhood, and apparently the sight of a decorated Navy officer walking beside the man the HOA had been targeting was worth talking about. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere was tense. A long table sat at the front of the room where 5 HOA board members were already seated. The president sat in the center, a woman in her late 50s with a rigid posture and a sharp gaze. She looked up as John and Emily entered, and for a split second her expression faltered, a tiny flicker of surprise before she put her mask back on. "Mr. Anderson,"
Yes.
the president said, her voice clipped. "We're here to address your ongoing violations," Emily stepped forward before John could say a word. "Actually," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we're here to address the HOA's ongoing misconduct toward my husband." The room went silent. A couple of the other board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The president's lips tightened. "And you are?" "Lieutenant Commander Emily Anderson, United States Navy," Emily said, producing a small folder from under her arm. "And before we proceed, I want to make sure this meeting is recorded for our records." One of the board members cleared his throat and fumbled with a small audio recorder. The president tried to regain control of the room, but Emily had already begun laying out her case. She started with the photos from the old real estate listing, proving the porch and flagpole were pre-existing. She followed that with the timeline of harassment, the letters, the unannounced inspections, the petty and inconsistent violations. Then she moved to the legal part, citing the exact sections of the Service Members' Civil Relief Act that the HOA had breached by targeting the spouse of an active duty service member. Every statement was clear, factual, and backed with evidence. She never raised her voice, but the weight of her words filled the room by the time she finished. The HOA president was no longer looking directly at her. The rest of the board members avoided eye contact altogether. Emily closed her folder and said, "You have 2 options. 1. You retract all violations, erase any fines from our record, and issue a formal apology for the HOA's treatment of my husband. Or 2, we take this to court, where I'm confident the outcome will not be in your favor." Already drafted a statement for the local press. I'm sure they'd be very interested in how this HOA treats military families. John sat quietly beside her, almost enjoying the stunned silence that followed. He had seen Emily handle tense situations before, but watching her dismantle the board's authority so calmly was something else entirely. The president finally spoke, her voice thinner than before. "We'll review the matter." "You'll do more than that," Emily said evenly. "You'll resolve it today." The room was so quiet that John could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock behind the HOA board. Emily sat with perfect posture, her uniform crisp, her expression calm but unyielding. The president of the HOA shifted in her seat, clearly caught off guard by how this meeting had turned out. She had probably imagined John arriving alone, flustered and unsure, ready to be lectured. Instead, here was Emily, a decorated Navy officer with a folder full of evidence and a voice that carried the weight of authority. "I believe I've made our position clear," Emily said, her gaze steady on the president. "This matter ends today, or it moves beyond this room. Which will it be?" The president tried to compose herself, adjusting the papers in front of her. "Lieutenant Commander Anderson," she began, her tone overly polite now, "while we certainly respect your service, the HOA has rules that apply to all residents. If we make exceptions," Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice still calm but sharper now. "This isn't about exceptions. This is about fairness. My husband has been targeted, harassed, and treated differently from other residents. That is discrimination. Can you know it? One of the other board members, a man in his early 60s, with glasses slipping down his nose, cleared his throat. Maybe we should review the evidence again? The photos clearly show, Emily interrupted, that the so-called violations were in place before my husband ever moved in. According to your own bylaws, she tapped the printed document in front of her. Pre-existing conditions that were approved for a prior owner cannot be retroactively penalized for a new owner. That's page 14, section 3B, if you'd like to read it aloud. The man looked down quickly, avoiding her eyes. Emily then pulled out another sheet of paper. And here is the section of the Service Members Civil Relief Act that prohibits certain actions against active duty personnel and their families. You've already crossed that line multiple times with these notices, inspections, and threats. The president's jaw tightened. You were not aware of your status, Emily raised an eyebrow. You were aware of my husband's status? It's on the property records that the purchase was made by a military family. Even if it weren't, ignorance is not a defense for breaking the law. John sat quietly beside her, resisting the urge to smile. He had never seen the HOA president look so cornered. The woman who had been so quick to send threatening letters was now fumbling for a way to maintain control of the room. After a long pause, the president finally spoke. What exactly are you asking for? Emily didn't miss a beat. All current violations retracted, all fines erased from our record, a written apology for the harassment, and confirmation that there will be no further targeting of our property. She glanced briefly at the other board members. And if you'd like to discuss the conduct of certain individuals on this board who have been taking unauthorized photographs and making unannounced visits, we can address that too. One of the board members, a woman with short hair and a nervous expression, shifted in her seat. I think it would be wise to resolve this, she said softly. The president looked at her sharply, as if surprised by the lack of support. She could see it in the others' faces. The momentum had shifted. No one wanted to go toe-to with Emily, especially not in a public meeting that was now being recorded. The silence stretched. Emily didn't fill it. She simply waited, calm and patient, knowing that silence can be more powerful than words. When you've already made your case, finally the president sighed. Very well, the violations will be withdrawn. The fines will be removed. We'll issue the letter you requested. John felt the tension in his shoulders loosen just slightly. But Emily wasn't finished. The targeting stops immediately. The president hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. Yes. Emily leaned back in her chair. Good, then we're done here. She stood, gathering her papers neatly, and John followed. As they turned toward the door, Emily paused and looked back at the board. I trust there won't be a repeat of this behavior, toward us or toward anyone else in this community. I'll be keeping an eye on that. With that, she walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. John walked beside her, feeling a strange mixture of pride and relief. It wasn't just that they had won, it was the way Emily had handled it. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't lost her temper. She had walked in prepared, confident, and impossible to ignore. Outside, the air felt different. The tension that had been building for weeks seemed to lift slightly, replaced by the quiet hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. They walked home together, and John noticed neighbors peeking out from behind curtains or standing at the edge of their driveways, watching them. When they reached their front porch, Emily sat down on the steps and let out a slow breath. You know, she said, people like that count on intimidation. They think if they pile on enough pressure, you'll just give in. But the truth is, most bullies fold the second they realize you're not afraid of them. John nodded. Think they're afraid of you now? Emily gave a small smile. Good, maybe they'll think twice before pulling this on someone else. Later that evening, while they were eating dinner, there was a knock on the door. John opened it to find the same nervous-looking board member from earlier, holding an envelope. The official notice, she said, handing it over. All violations rescinded, fines removed, and the apology letter. She hesitated. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how this was handled. Not everyone on the board agreed with the president's approach. John thanked her, and she walked away quickly, as if worried someone might see her there. Emily opened the envelope and read the letter. It was formal, but the wording was clear. All previous violations against their property were null and void, and the HOA regretted any distress caused. Emily folded it neatly and set it on the table. "Keep this somewhere safe," she said, "just in case." The next day, word spread through the neighborhood. A few neighbors who had kept their distance before now stopped by to say hello, offering casual congratulations in their own way. One older couple even brought over a pie, saying, "It's about time someone stood up to them." John realized then that their fight with the HOA had been about more than just their own house. It had been about drawing a line in the sand. Thanks to Emily, that line was now crystal clear. The next few days after the meeting felt different, almost as if the air in the neighborhood had shifted. Though for weeks, John had walked outside with a heavy feeling in his chest, always scanning the street for someone with a camera or a clipboard. Now, he stepped out onto the porch without that knot in his stomach. There were no strange figures taking pictures, no letters stuffed into the mailbox with bold red violation stamps. For the first time in months, the house felt like a home again, not a battlefield. It wasn't just the absence of harassment, it was the way people looked at them now. Before, neighbors had mostly kept their distance. Some had offered polite waves, but no one really engaged. Now, John noticed something different in their eyes. Respect, curiosity, maybe even a little admiration. Word had clearly spread about what happened at the HOA meeting. People wanted to hear the story firsthand. 2 days after the meeting, Carl, the neighbor who had warned John about the HOA's history, came over while John was fixing the mailbox. "Heard you had." "Quite the showdown," Carl said, his tone carrying a hint of amusement. "Wish I could have been there to see the president's face." John smiled faintly. Emily handled it. "I mostly just sat there and tried not to grin." Carl chuckled. "Well, whatever she did, it worked. A lot of us have been dealing with this nonsense for years. Fines for grass being too long by an inch, letters about the wrong type of garden hose, but nobody ever pushed back like that. You might have just started something." Over the next week, more neighbors stopped by. Some brought baked goods, others just wanted to shake Emily's hand. One woman told them about how the HOA had fined her for having non-standard curtains visible from the street. Another man admitted he had paid hundreds in fines for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight. It became clear that John and Emily weren't the only ones who had been targeted. They were just the first to fight back in a way. The HOA couldn't ignore the apology letter from the board stayed pinned to the corkboard in their kitchen. Every time John saw it, he felt a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. The same people who had threatened him with legal action had been forced to back down completely. And it wasn't just because Emily wore a Navy uniform, it was because she knew exactly how to use the truth, the law, and her presence to make them listen. About a week later, an announcement went out to the whole community. The HOA president had decided to step down from her position due to personal reasons. Nobody really believed the official wording, but no one seemed sad about her departure either. A special election was planned to choose a new president. And for the first time, John noticed real conversations among neighbors about making the HOA more reasonable. Emily didn't get involved in the politics, but her influence was clear. People looked to her now when they talked about standing up for themselves. One afternoon, a younger couple approached them outside and said, "If we ever have trouble with the HOA again, we know who to call." Emily smiled politely but reminded them, "You don't need me. You just need to know your rights and be willing to stand your ground." Life slowly returned to normal. The small joys of homeownership, planting flowers, sitting on the porch, in the evening, hearing the quiet hum of the neighborhood, came back into focus. John even repainted the mailbox, not because the HOA told him to, but because he felt like it. He chose the same color it had been before, just with a fresh coat. It was his subtle way of saying, "I do what I want on my terms." One Saturday morning, while John was trimming the hedges, Emily joined him outside with 2 mugs of coffee. She leaned against the porch railing and watched the street for a moment. "You know," she said, "this whole thing could have gone very differently. If you'd gotten angry early on, if you'd shouted or refused to engage, they might have used that against you." John nodded. "Wanted to, plenty of times." But I figured you'd have a better plan. Emily grinned. I did bullies feed off fear, but they don't know what to do when you show up calm, prepared, and unwilling to back down. They sipped their coffee in companionable silence, watching a group of kids ride their bikes past. One of the parents waved as they passed, calling out, "Morning, Commander." Emily waved back with a small laugh. In the weeks that followed, the HOA seemed to operate differently. There were still occasional notices sent to residents, but they were softer in tone, and people said the new board was actually listening to appeals. There were no more random inspections, no men with cameras lingering on sidewalks. The fear that had once hung over the neighborhood was replaced by something closer to community. John noticed something else too. He and Emily were more connected now than they had been in a long time. Her deployment had been hard, and they'd both been looking forward to simple, quiet days together. Instead, they'd been thrown into a conflict almost as soon as she got home. But going through it together, side by side, had reminded them both of what they were capable of when they trusted each other. One evening, as they sat in the backyard watching the sun go down, John said, "I think the HOA will think twice before messing with us again." Emily gave a small, knowing smile. "They'll think twice before messing with anyone. That's the real win here." And she was right. Months later, when they attended a neighborhood barbecue, John overheard two residents talking about how things had changed since the Navy lady showed up. There was less tension, more openness, and a sense that the board couldn't just steamroll people anymore. Emily didn't brag about it, but John could see the quiet pride in her eyes. The flagpole still stood in their yard, just as it had the day they moved in. Every morning, the flag caught the sunlight and swayed gently in the breeze. It had become more than a decoration now. It was a symbol of everything they'd fought for. It's not just their right to keep it, but their right to live in peace, without being pushed around by those who thought rules were tools for control. Sometimes, when John saw it from the kitchen window, he thought back to that first letter from the HOA, the one that had made his stomach sink and made him feel like a stranger. In his own home, he remembered the uncertainty, the frustration, the moments he wondered if it was worth fighting. And then he remembered Emily walking into that meeting in her uniform, her voice steady, her evidence unshakable, and how the entire dynamic had changed in minutes. That image stayed with him.
Ow.
Not just as a memory of a single victory, but as a reminder of something bigger. When you know the truth is on your side, and you refuse to be intimidated, even the most stubborn bullies have to back down. For John and Emily, it wasn't just about winning against the HOA. It was about reclaiming their home, their peace, and their right to live without fear. And in that quiet little neighborhood with its tree-lined streets and tidy lawns, they had done exactly that.